Hello and welcome. Today I'll be walking you through how I created the Nessmuk Skinner. So what I'm currently doing there, apologies. So what I'm currently doing there is creating the template. I transferred it to a piece of steel. The steel is a 1075 high carbon steel. Um, at the moment, I don't have anything able to heat treat any of the fancier steels, so 1075 is what I use. Other stuff will come later. So I'm just using an angle grinder with a cutoff disc to get the rough profile of the shape in. And then from there, I switch over to a thicker grinding wheel to get the rough end of the shape in. So the Nessmuk Skinner is it's a skinning knife, obviously by the name, uh, and it's designed with the larger cutting belly to be used for the subcutaneous layer of fat on something similar to a deer. So what I've done there is I've marked the edges using just a bit of like a felt tip pen, and then I've put the choil in, which is easy to put in now rather than later. From here, I've just gone across to what I use for my wood tools to help grind back into sharpness. However, what I'm doing is just using it to get a rough edge, and it saves a lot of time later. So from here, I come across to, I think it's called like a goof jig. I'm not 100% certain on the name, so I apologize for that. However, this allows me to set an exact bevel, and then I'll use a file to rough in from there. So I'm just using a bastard cut file with a long pull. Eliminates a fair bit of work, but it's still quite a lot. So that took roughly like 2 hours per side. From here, I've just gone across to an old 36 grit belt I had lying around for a just like a wood sander. I've just stretched it across a tire, which I know is flat, and just to get the sides down perfect. So I've gone out to my local Bunnings store and bought more sandpaper than I care to admit for, and I'll work my way up pre-heat treatment from 80 grit up to about, I think I stopped at 180 on this one. So this is the magic of hand sanding. Because it's a high carbon steel, I don't use water. What I use is just Windex. It stops the blade from rusting. Well, it stops the backside of the blade rusting as you go through each side. And once I get to a higher heat treat, so after heat treat, and I'm worried more about the scratches, I will go through and put a piece of cloth underneath the blade, which stops it from getting scratched by the wood. So knife making is something I've wanted to do for a long time. However, with my current job, I found it very hard to actually get the time to do it. However, I've been posted to a new area now, and my current job, my current job, my current position allows me a little bit more time to spend at home doing the things that I enjoy. So this is my sort of fledgling attempt into knife making. I have an Instagram account which has got a sort of a behind the scenes access, and it's got a few other knives that I won't have on my YouTube. So if you want to follow me along there, you can see down in the description, and I'll link my Instagram account, which is also then linked to my Facebook account. This is my third knife, I believe it is. I have, yeah, my third knife. This is the first time I've ever done a full tang as well. I don't know why I left that edit in there. It just sort of shows you the monotony of hand sanding, I guess. This is my heat treating forge that I created. It's literally just a Milo tin with a bit of refractory cement around it that allows for a gas screen. So I've taken that up to critical temperature, which means for that steel anyway, that I can touch against a magnet and it loses its magnicity. Is that a word? But from there, back in for about another 30 seconds just to get the heat back up for any heat loss that was due to pulling it out. And then I plunge it in a warmed, just cooking oil, and that hardens the blade. From there, it becomes incredibly brittle. So what I've done is I've stuck it in the oven for 2 hours at 210 degrees, and then that just allows the temperature in the steel to come back up, softening the steel a little bit, but keeping the majority of the hardness. So by tempering the blades, you get rid of all the brittleness, but you keep the bulk of the hardness, which is what allows the knife to keep its edge. So from here, I go back to 120 grit sandpaper, and that's what I use to clean up the knife. As you can see, I got all the black stuff off using that. And what I'll do from there is I'll work my way up to a 600 grit, which you'll see shortly. And then what I do is I went up to an 800 grit, and then I went back down to a 600 grit and started at the far end of the blade and worked my way down in one long pull, and that created an even scratch pattern all the way along. For when I got to the area on the ricasso with the plunge line, I had to sort of slide the sandpaper down and then draw it along the blade, but going straight out and not following the curve of the blade in order to get a clean effect, which you'll see shortly. Oh, I forgot to film it, but I have drilled 3 holes going through the wood, crushing through the steel for the pins. So you can go the scratch pattern, starting at the end, running down, and you want one long straight pull. If you sort of move the sandpaper up and down, you create what's known as like little J hooks, and it's not a nice finish. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating the templates for the handle. So I've traced out the final dimensions of the knife, and I've gone through creating what size I'll need. So the 2 woods that I'm using here, I've got Arctic Birch, which is the white wood. It's just a super grade, and a black palm. I think it's called black palm. It's been stabilized, and I got both of these products from creativeman.com.au. It's an excellent website for an Australian knife maker, and I can't recommend his products enough. So you saw before that it sort of just showed you how I cut the curve or the radius. So from there, I've got a little piece of, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, apologies, the plastic, and then there's a brass spacer in between. So I'm going through here, and again, sorry for the camera angle, I didn't realize that the camera had fallen a little bit, and I'm just gluing that together. So it goes black palm, red spacer, brass spacer, red spacer, and then the birch. So once that's all dried, I glued the bulk of the red spacer onto the back of that, which you can see in those shots. And now I'm just getting everything square and back to flatness. So you can see I'm using the pre-drilled holes in the metal in order to create the drill holes in the wood. And then from there, I've gone through, and what I'm doing here is I'm lining everything up and then using the holes that I've already just drilled to drill the next ones. So I put pins front and rear, and I'm now profiling the front. So when you saw me create the template, you saw me do curved lines. So I just roughed them out on the wood sander, for lack of a better word. It's pretty dangerous. I wouldn't recommend doing that at home. I should stop doing it myself. But from here, I'm just working my way up to, I believe it's a 2000 grit sandpaper. And as you can see, coming up, the thin lines that you can see is where I put the piece of wood on an angle. I'm creating just a little secondary bevel on the wood that helps it to prevent from chipping and damages. So it's a bit blurry at the front, but when I go side on, you can see the effect of the wood. It's a lovely wood. It's very sandy is probably the best term for it, but there's no natural grain in it, so it has to be resin hardened in order to sand it properly. So what I'm doing here is I've got the brass pins. I've just taken them up to red temperature and then let them air cool. Put them in, glued everything up, and what I'm doing here is I'm hitting it against a railroad spike, and that's just enlarging the brass that I'm currently hitting, and it fills up any gaps that I have in the wood, maybe from an oversized drill bit or just where I haven't gone in at a straight angle. Using the belt sander, I've just cutting up getting the blade to profile. For the areas that I couldn't reach with this sander, I've just got a Dremel, which I forgot to film. So from here, I've taken a rough rasp and started profiling. But however, when I get to the brass bits, I've had to go back to a proper file, a finer toothed file in order to cut the brass. Just using a standard Schumann shine, which is sort of sandpaper over the blade, up and down, as you can see there. What I'm doing is profiling the blade, and I've started at, I believe it was 80 grit, and working my way back up to, I think I went to 1200 on this knife. But I haven't recorded all of that because, again, that took about 6-7 hours and it's quite boring. In between each coat, I would bevel the flat side back down on a piece of sandpaper that I'd laid over a known flat object, just to make sure that the faces were good as well. So here's the final profile done, and this is adding the Danish oil just to put a bit of the Danish oil gets absorbed by the wood and then solidifies. This makes the wood a bit harder. So there's the finished product. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. I ended up putting a 17-degree bevel on it. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and rate. Thank you very much.